Hello, psych students. Hello, APUSH students. I want to go through the next couple of slides. I'll be looking at this sheet here, and we're going to talk about the formation of the Republican Party and the election of 1860 and the first states to secede. So let's get into what we need to do today. So the other day when we were together, we talked a lot about this slide right here. And I hope you understand that this slide is really like the turning point in period 5. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Compromise of 1850, the Dred Scott decision, these are all things that are literally going to take the country down a path that it was kind of like a little bit shaky and rocky, and now it's going to turn it. And a lot of it had to do with that man right there on the right, as well as that man there on the left. On the left is Abraham Lincoln, and on the right is Stephen A. Douglas. So let's get into at least the formation of the Republican Party. The second party system ended when the issues of slavery and anti-immigration nativism, remember when we talked about that word nativism, weakened, and loyalties to the two major parties and fostered the emergence of sectional parties, most notably the Republican Party in the North. So what I want you to understand is now the Republican Party has become a more unified group. They've basically taken the Whigs, remember the old Whigs, the Free Soilers, we've talked a little bit about the Free Soilers, and the Liberty Party, and they've kind of combine them into one Republican Party. And Abe Lincoln is going to be the one to really kind of represent the Republican Party. So this is really a pretty new party. Now, if you notice, the second party system ended. We had the Democrats and the Whigs, but now, the Whigs can't get their act together, and the Free Soilers are kind of and the Liberty Party is not real organized. So they're finally coming together. But actually, now we're going to have kind of this continued split, and there's going to be the Republican Party, the Northern Democrats, the Southern Democrats, and what was called the Constitutional Party. So now we're going to actually have like a 4-party system. We're not quite there yet, but I do want you to understand that while the Republican Party was able to kind of get their act together and come together, they still weren't really strong, and there's a lot of sectional division going on. Lincoln's support of the Free Soil doctrine. I had mentioned that before, that the Free Soilers basically said, if you live in Free Soil area, you need to be, what did I put down? You need to be able to be free. And this was especially in areas of the North. You couldn't, the issue of slavery was not going to come up. If people who had been enslaved are there, they shouldn't have to be sent back to their masters. And so essentially the Fugitive Slave Act, he was saying, is absolutely unconstitutional, is completely incorrect. So here's the deal. Abe Lincoln was a lawyer, and he starts kind of dabbling in politics. He runs for the House of Representatives and his own state legislature. Abe Lincoln was born in Kentucky, but he moves to Illinois. He practices law in Illinois, and he gets a House seat. Well, eventually he's going to run for a Senate seat in Illinois. And this is where Lincoln gives his famous House divided speech in 1858. So he's running against that man right there on the right. His name is Stephen Douglas. Now, Stephen Douglas has been a senator in Illinois for already, a long time, several terms already. And Lincoln, as this new Republican Party, is going to run as a Republican in Illinois. Now, keep in mind, the Republicans are not a real strong party yet because they're just really trying to form themselves. So Lincoln gives his most probably famous speech. In fact, people looked at the speech as very radical, as a real turning point in politics. And he gives the House divided speech, which we're going to look at tomorrow. And it basically says, a house divided cannot stand. We will fall. And the reason we are going to fall as a country, as a nation, is because of slavery. And so he gives this famous speech, and it is he gives a speech as he's beginning his campaign to run for the Senate seat against Stephen Douglas in Illinois. So this is very much a state thing, but it's propelling them to like the national limelight. I mean, and think about what's going on in 1858. There's not a ton of like, there's no social media, anything like that. And so that it was that impressive to make national news of a state, of a state's Senate seat is a really big deal. So eventually these two are going to head off in what's called the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So here's the deal. They agreed, so Lincoln gives his famous House divided speech, and he gives it in Springfield. Lincoln practices law in Springfield, and he gives it in Springfield. Well, shortly after that, this is in like the summer of 1858, they're going to start this series of debates all throughout Illinois. And they agreed to go to 7 different congressional districts in Illinois to give their speeches, to make their kind of debates and talk about this. What is interesting is, remember that now I'm losing it, the 13th Amendment? No, it was later than that. I can't think of it now. The legislative spots are chosen by the state legislatures, so that they're going to give these speeches publicly is really saying a lot, because the people are not the one choosing that legislative spot in the state, but it is an interesting concept. So they go around giving these in 7 different cities, giving these speeches, and one of them happens to be in Freeport, Illinois. And this is where Stephen Douglas probably makes his biggest blunder. He gives what's called the Freeport Doctrine. And the Freeport Doctrine, this is a speech in Freeport, Illinois. Basically, Stephen Douglas is championing popular sovereignty. Remember, Stephen Douglas has had this idea of popular sovereignty before. Well, he is coming back and saying popular sovereignty is going to work. We have to give people this right to vote on the issue of slavery. And to be honest, if they want slavery, they can have it. And if they don't have to have slavery in their state. Well, think of what had happened in 1857. And that slide before, I would go back, I don't want to go back, on that slide before with the Dred Scott decision. Basically, this is angering a lot of Southern Democrats, because they said, listen, Douglas, you're on our side. The Democrats, you're on our side. And we basically just won. Slaves are not considered people. They're not considered a human being. They are property. And so the issue of slavery should not be, like a democratic issue, because slaves aren't even a person. And so when he championed his idea of popular sovereignty, that there should be continued to be elections of whether or not it would be a free state or a slave state, he alienated a lot of Southern Democrats. And so this also contributes to the formation of the Republican Party, because now the Democratic Party is going to really, really begin to fraction itself. Okay, so Lincoln loses. Lincoln loses this congressional seat in Illinois. Stephen Douglas keeps his seat. He's going on for another term. Seems like it's fine, right? Until we get to 1860. And so the election of 1860, this one right here, and secession. So a couple things that I want you to know. The election of 1860 is surprisingly, remember I had mentioned there were 4 parties now. We don't have a 2-party system anymore. The 2 big ones, Lincoln and Douglas. And then there are 2 other ones. Buchanan's running mate decided to run. And so we've got 4 different parties running, and Lincoln runs for president. So does Stephen Douglas. Basically, the reason that Lincoln ran for president was because of the House divided speech. Republicans were so pleased and happy with the way he spoke, how he talked about slavery, how he talked about it was not, it was a moral issue, but let's look at it from a political standpoint of states' rights and things. And so he's trying to actually like really be level-headed about this in the political realm. And they in the Republican Party said, "You're our man. You are going to run for president." He does, and he wins. It's not by a lot, but he wins. So Abraham Lincoln's victory on the Republicans' free soil platform in the election of 1860 was accomplished without any Southern electoral votes. Again, because the Southern and Northern Democrats are so fractured right now, he wins. It's not by a big margin, but it's enough. He wins. After a series of contested debates about secession, most slave states voted to secede from the Union, precipitating the Civil War. So, shortly after, I mean within like a month after, we have secession of the 7 southern states. So the very first one is South Carolina. Like almost immediately after Lincoln is elected president, South Carolina is the very first state to secede. So you might want to write these down. South Carolina is the first, then comes Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, and then we have Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And so these states are going to secede, and they're going to basically say, we're making our own confederacy. We are making our own nation. And it was entirely on the issue of slavery, because they looked at Abraham Lincoln and they knew this is going to go down because of the House Divided speech, because of his platform on the free soil, that that slaves, if they are on free soil, should continue to be free. They saw Stephen Douglas as not a real helper to Southern states with strong slavery proposals. And so this becomes a really big deal. I want you to add one thing on the secession, on this one right here. So you have those first 7, right? And then the next 4, essentially. Please add this, and this is an important part. Missouri, because remember the Missouri Compromise, Maryland, and think about where Maryland is, Delaware, and Kentucky. All 4 of those states are what we call border states. So Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, and Kentucky. You need to write those 4 down. We call those states the border states. Now, in border states, they allowed slavery. So border states are going to allow slavery, but they stayed in the Union. And that is going to be a huge point when we get on to the next couple of slides about the Emancipation Proclamation and the beginning of the Civil War. So those 4 border states are still going to allow slavery, but they're going to stay in the Union. They are not going to secede with the first 7 and the next 4 that followed, okay? So actually we're not going to go through Fort Sumter and the Crittenden Compromise and all of that right now, because we'll go through that together later on. So you should have this next couple of things filled out here, and I think you understand after we read together the House Divided speech how big of a deal this really is. All right, until next time, we'll see you then.